After studying this module, you shall be able to know about economics and its two branches, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Learn whether economics is a science or an art, is positive or normative. Identify the broad areas of economics such as consumer choice, production behavior, markets, and so on. Evaluate the relation in which economics stands vis-à-vis other subjects, and analyze the economics approach to the world around us, especially the microeconomic approach.
To understand what microeconomics is, we must first understand what economics is all about. The etymology and the general meaning of economics comes from the term which in Greek means okios, which is house, and nomos, which is management. That literally means house management, management of the home, that is expenditure, income, and so on of the home. In the present day sense, however, economics is a subject whose study assists the households, individuals, groups, nations, and even international organizations in making important choices for material welfare both in the short run and the long run under limitations or constraints of resources. Under its widespread umbrella comes the individual, the household, and so on, who go to the market, and the firms also who make profits. It could be village economy, it could be in relation to an industrial town, it could be about a less developed country or about a multinational organization or the world economy in general.
Even though the term economics had not come into usage, there was thinking on economic issues in Western Europe from the 16th to the late 17th century that went by the name of mercantilism or merchant-like thoughts. It emphasized the role of the government in following policies leading to a positive balance of trade and was thought to be the index of the country's prosperity. In the second half of the 18th century, there emerged economic thought that went by the name physiocracy. It emphasized the role of land and agriculture in ensuring a country's prosperity. The mercantilists had focused on trade and commerce and the accumulation of gold and silver. The physiocrats focused on productive work leading to the generation of agricultural surplus.
In the third quarter of the 18th century, with the publication of the great work of none other than Adam Smith, in 1776, Adam Smith published an inquiry into the nature and causes of wealth of nations, in short known as Wealth of Nations. This classical economist was from Britain, and in the beginning he was influenced by the experience of the Industrial Revolution of Britain. Adam Smith emphasized the division of labor and specialization as a source of productivity or efficiency in the firms or factories, which contributed aggregatively to the nation's wealth or welfare, or as it is known as the nation's prosperity. Therefore, Adam Smith is treated as the father of economic science. Simultaneously, or just around that time, or maybe slightly later, there were certain other classical economists such as J.B. Say, T.R. Malthus, David Ricardo and John Stuart Mill, who further picked up his ideas and enhanced and amplified these ideas and made contributions to the new body of thought. They came from different professions, but all of them had an aggregative approach and took a long-term perspective, making sweeping generalizations. Together with Adam Smith, they constitute the classical economists. Towards the end of the 19th century, there developed a new approach which has now come to be known as the neoclassical approach. Economists began to study economic issues on a more individual level, asking how the price or the quantity of a specific commodity of a good or a service could be determined in the market, how a firm would set the wage rate, how a firm, individual firm would maximize profits or minimize their costs. The canvas became much smaller, the issues became narrower, the conclusions were less sweeping. Instead of aggregation, the unit or the marginal concept or the incremental concept became much more important, and the focus was no longer on the entire nation but on the individual consumer or the individual producer, or as we call it, the household or the firm. The decisions depended upon a rational weighting of the costs and benefits. This led to an approach where the microeconomics was always in search of an equilibrium, some kind of a balance, because invariably the costs and benefits were to be weighed against each other. This equilibrium became the most important objective rather than looking at the wealth of nations and its growth. Menger, William Stallinson Jevons, Alfred Marshall and were some of the names which come to our mind when we talk about neoclassical economists, and they are often also known as the marginalists because their analysis is based on looking at every phenomenon in terms of the margin, the last unit. The last unit could be marginal revenue, marginal cost, marginal utility, marginal productivity and so on.
Marshall's Principles of Economics, 1890, the pioneering work of neoclassical tradition, provided the following definition of economics: a study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. It examines that part of individual and social action which is most closely connected with the attainment and with the use of the material requisites of well-being. Thus, it is on the one side a study of wealth, and on the other, and the more important side, a part of the study of man. This definition established the character of the subject for a long time to come. Economics studies human beings as they go about their everyday life. In 1932, in Lionel Robbins's essay on the nature and significance of economic science, Lionel Robbins highlighted another aspect of the subject: choice under conditions of scarcity. Economics is a science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. Resources or means of production, land, labor, capital goods such as machinery and technical knowledge are scarce or limited. What is applied to the production of a certain commodity or service is unavailable for the production of another alternative one. But human wants for the consumption or use of goods and services, food, clothing, housing, education, entertainment, are countless and unlimited. So, people or organizations must choose among them. Economics is the study of how people or organizations can choose to use the scarce or limited resources to produce various goods and services and distribute them to various members of society for them to consume. Contemporary economics is largely built upon this Robbinsian understanding of economics.
Is economics a science or art? This is a very important question. If we look at some famous definitions, we see that Marshall regards it as a study of mankind, which is what Robinson sees it as a science. Therefore, Marshall is looking at it in terms of humanities and therefore would treat it as an art, whereas Robinson is looking at it as a science. Most universities and the degrees that are conferred by universities, they offer Bachelor of Arts or Master of Arts degrees, and therefore in general economics has been treated as an art. In contrast, it would be interesting to know that the London School of Economics actually offers a BSc and an MSc degree to all its students in economics. Therefore, we cannot just go by the nomenclature of the degree, but it is important to understand the basic thought behind what economics is about and what we should consider it and call it an art or a science. Indeed, the scope of economics is so wide that it is difficult to label it either as an art or as a science, and some people would like to call it a mixture of the two. A Nobel Prize winner, a great economist, Paul Samuelson, put it in the following words: not only is economics at once an art and a science, economics as a subject can combine the attractive features of both humanities and sciences. But even if the epithet science is given to economics, it remains a social science. It is, just to use Marshall's words, the study of mankind. So when we say the study of mankind, obviously, well, we could believe, we could agree with what Samuelson says, that it is partly a science and partly an art, but it is a science which relates to mankind, and therefore it is a social science. It relates to and it concerns the people or the members of a society or a nation or an economy who are acting and interacting among themselves through a complex process like production or exchange or consumption or distribution. So we must remember that all these processes are social processes involving large number of people. There is of course the concept of a Robinson Crusoe economy, where a country has just got one person performing all the economic activities by himself, and the name is obviously borrowed from the title of a book by Daniel Defoe, where one individual is shipwrecked on an island, but this is merely an analytical tool to facilitate the understanding of very complex problems and concepts in economics which are difficult to understand in a real economy. So, essentially, the subject of economics may be a science, but it is social in character. Let us now discuss whether economics is positive or normative. In 1953, Milton Friedman, in his essays in positive economics, said that economics should not be normative. That is, it should not pass any moral judgment or strictures about human behavior. In fact, economics, according to Friedman, should be positive. That is, it should make certain theories or propositions or statements like, if price of a commodity goes up, then the quantity demanded or consumed falls, other things being constant. Rather than saying that, well, you stupid consumer, don't go on buying more of the commodity even when the price is increasing. Therefore, in a nutshell, it means that economics is concerned about positivism. Even policy prescriptions or recommendations should be expressed in a categorical, discreet and calm way, such as, if there is inflation, then the government should not issue more of notes, and because it is likely that the inflation may get exaggerated or aggravated. Rather than making statements like that the government would be stupid in increasing the money supply. We shall now discuss what the subjects do relate to economics. The subjects which are close to economics are mathematics and statistics as tools of economics used for theoretical as well as empirical verification. The pioneers like Alfred Marshall used verbal exposition as well as graphs to make out their points and say about certain concepts such as demand curve or the cost curve and so on. But in contemporary times, it is impossible to study economic theory without the knowledge of mathematical techniques such as geometry, algebra, calculus, set theory, matrices and so on. However, Samuelson assures that it is only for the higher reaches of economic theory that mathematics is needed. For a general understanding, it is enough to be alert and informed, and to have logical reasoning is the key to success in the mastery of basic economic principles, and shrewd weighing of empirical evidence is the key to success in mastery of economic applications.
Economics is both theoretical and empirical. For empirical analysis, the application of statistics to economics has led to the emergence of econometrics. Most contemporary research in economics is done with the help of econometrics. Political science also helps in the study of economics, which was originally called political economy. History and geography are also essential for a grasp of economics. Sociology and history are also related areas. Economic history and economic geography have developed as subjects in their own right. Other subjects or courses that have emerged from economics are commerce, business economics, business administration, and business management. Undergraduate courses in commerce and business economics compulsorily include courses or papers in economics.
Let us now understand the precise meaning of the term microeconomics. In Greek, the word micro and macro mean small and huge, respectively. Microeconomics is a branch of economics that studies economics in relation to issues relating to the smallest individual, the smallest entity, the smallest detail, as though we are examining it under a microscope. In contrast, macroeconomics studies economic issues in aggregation and in the overall form and context, looking at the broad picture. Classical economists like Adam Smith, J.B. Say, David Ricardo, and so on were concerned, as we have said, about the nation, the country as a whole, and sometimes about the world as a whole. Their analysis was more macro in nature. Neoclassical economists like Alfred Marshall and Gibbons were concerned about the household, the firms as individual units rather than as an aggregative entity, and they used to look at very fine concepts such as the marginal concept, which is a small addition, an increment in the units, in the basic units, as a basic tool of their methodology. The margin was the concept they used in their techniques of study, and for example, it was old-fashioned neoclassical economics theory which talks about marginal utility. They say that the price of a commodity is decided by the additional utility of that small additional yield of one unit in terms of utility. Microeconomics is therefore the perspective of the small, the perspective on the micro unit, the perspective on the smallest unit. Now let us understand by contrast what does macroeconomics mean. So far, modern macroeconomics is concerned as distinct from classical economics, which was macro in character. It started with the famous economist John Maynard Keynes, J.M. Keynes, and Keynes came to the limelight after the Great Depression of the 30s, about which he has written great volumes. During the 30s, during the Depression, both Europe and America suffered along with the colonies across the world, and there was an accumulation of unsold stocks, closure of production units of firms, and there was widespread unemployment. Both the employers as well as the employees suffered, and this whole phenomenon was studied by Keynes by analyzing what is known as aggregate demand and the falling of a demand which is known as deficient demand, and argued that under such circumstances, if the government of a country played an active role and stepped into the economy by spending on its own in a situation where the firms and households are not prepared to spend, then the aggregate demand or effective demand be increased, be raised in the economy, and this would correct the situation of depression. Therefore, in this kind of analysis, the focus is at the level of the economy. So, this was the beginning of modern macroeconomics. Later on, there were certain economists such as John Hicks, Milton Friedman, Lucas and others who have developed and extended macroeconomics to a great extent through many of the thoughts and the policy implications. We further draw a comparison between microeconomics and macroeconomics. There are many issues of comparison when we want to compare microeconomics and macroeconomics. Is there any way, any particular framework of how this can be done? Which is more fundamental, which is more important? Well, sometimes many universities ask students to take a course first in microeconomics and then go to macroeconomics. However, in some universities recently they have been offering both the courses in the first semester. So far as undergraduate and even postgraduate studies are concerned, it is essential for students to grasp the concepts of microeconomics before going over to the concept of macroeconomics. For example, the concept of margin is learnt first through the concepts of microeconomics, and similarly marginal utility, marginal rate of substitution, marginal productivity and so on are essential for understanding basics of economics. Only then can the student proceed to other concepts such as marginal propensity to consume or the marginal propensity to save, which are concepts of macroeconomics. The concept of consumer equilibrium also has to be learnt first before the student can progress to equilibrium in the entire economy. And similar theories exist in the case of trade theory, such as the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem in international trade and so on. So far as public policy is concerned with macroeconomics, but the relevance of public policy also could be understood only if the student is aware of microeconomics.
Let us now understand consumer choice and demand. It deals with how an individual consumer, person or household chooses what quantities he or she should buy at certain market prices so as to maximize satisfaction. That is, how a demand curve or function is arrived at for the individual and for the market. Moving on to production, cost, revenue, profit. This relates to how a productive unit, say the firm, chooses on the basis of cost considerations and revenue prospects what quantity to produce and sell so as to maximize profits. That is, how a supply curve or function is arrived at both the individual and market levels. Next, we discuss about market, structure and strategy. Markets can be of various forms or structures, for example, monopsony. In addition to standard tools of geometry and calculus, game theory is often used to analyze the various strategies suitable for the various markets. So, after the analysis of consumption and production comes the analysis of markets. Further, we learn about factor payments, risk, uncertainty. This relates to the determination of payments for the various factors of production such as rent, wages and profits in terms of marginal productivity, reward for risk taking, etc. We shall now study about welfare economics. This relates to the maximization of satisfaction or welfare for the society rather than the individual. It encompasses situations of market failure caused often by externalities as well as problems caused by information that is asymmetric. Welfare economics is concerned with the type of policy recommendations economists can make. We study resource and environmental economics in the hope that we can determine ways to increase the welfare of society. Specifically, we are concerned with whether economics can make policy recommendations relating to the use of natural and environmental resources, and if so, what sort of recommendations. This section is concerned with concepts like efficiency, that is, Pareto optimality, equity, social optimality or optimality, conditions under which pure competition will and will not achieve an efficient allocation of resources, marginal rules for policy analysis, general versus partial equilibrium analysis, proposed welfare criteria such as the Pareto criterion, the Kaldor criterion, the Saitowski criterion, and benefit cost analysis, market failures, common property resources, externalities, decreasing cost industries, public goods, monopoly power, and the non existence of certain markets, social welfare functions, the theory of the second best and its implications for policy recommendations, and dynamic analysis. We shall now discuss the concept of international trade. Like two or more individuals, countries too can come together in relations of production and exchange. This international trade too is analyzed in microeconomics, beginning with the theories of the mercantilists and Adam Smith to more modern ones. The treatment, however, is different from that of open economics in macroeconomics, say by Mundell Fleming. International trade is the exchange of capital, goods, and services across international borders or territories. In most countries, such trade represents a significant share of gross domestic product or GDP. While international trade has been present throughout much of history, its economic, social, and political importance has been on the rise in recent centuries. It is the presupposition of international trade that a sufficient level of geopolitical peace and stability are prevailing in order to allow for the peaceful exchange of trade and commerce to take place between nations. Trading globally gives consumers and countries the opportunity to be exposed to new markets and products. Almost every kind of product can be found on the international market: food, clothes, spare parts, oil, jewelry, wine, stocks, currencies, and water. Services are also traded: tourism, banking, consulting, and transportation. A product that is sold to the global market is an export, and a product that is bought from the global market is an import. Imports and exports are accounted for in a country's current account in the balance of payments.
We shall now summarize what we have learnt in this module. The subject of economics helps individuals, groups, nations, and international organizations to make important choices for material welfare both in the short run and in the long run, and also to understand the uh, presence of such choices in the presence of limitations and constraints on the availability of resources. Economics has evolved right since the 16th century, and the early economic thinkers were mercantilists, physiocrats and classicals, and then came the neoclassical economists, and then Keynesian economics. Alfred Marshall was the neoclassical economist who provided definition of economics as a study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. Another neoclassical economist named Lionel Robbins defined economics as a science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses, and this is one of the most popular definitions of economics. Economics is both a science and an art, and it is both it is positive rather than normative. It is related to various subjects such as on the humanities side, history and geography, and to some extent sociology, but on the other hand it is also related to exact sciences such as mathematics, algebra, statistics and so on. Economics can be broadly divided into two branches: microeconomics, which is the branch that studies the smallest economic unit in terms of the individual household, the firm and so on, and macroeconomics, which is concerned with the aggregate analysis, the entire economy, and looks at the broad picture. Sometimes it goes beyond the economy as well to look at the entire world. Both the branches are important. Microeconomics includes questions of consumer choice, production function, markets, factor payments, uncertainty, welfare and international trade, whereas macroeconomics concerns things such as aggregate demand, aggregate supply, national income determination, multiplier and so on.